Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of the E46 Drift Build. Today we're doing all the welding. We've already made a good start, but we've got a long way to go. So stay tuned, I'll show you how this works out. Hey guys, and welcome to episode 3 of the E46 Drift Build. Today is a big day for us as we're going to be doing all the welding on this chassis, hopefully. We've saved this one for a weekend so we have good lighting and more time on our side, so we should get all of it done today. The plan of attack is starting with the rear wheel arch. We're going to repair those spot welds we didn't do in the last video. We're then going to go ahead and seam weld a lot of the chassis. And wrap up with installing the underside plates as well as something new I've been working on the top side. So I guess it's time to gear up, get the welder ready, and we'll get straight into it. Well, that's the wheel arches stitch welded. Basically, some are good, some are bad. It's very dependent on the amount of rubberized material we'll be able to get out of the two faces. Where it was nice and tight, as you can see, really tidy. Where there was a big gap and tons of that rubberized material, still got a bit clumpier and uglier. But all in all, pretty happy with that, and it's definitely not going to let go. In addition to that, we die grinded out those two spot welds just to get all the old material out. Filled them both with just a plug weld. And I even used the die grinder to add a third spot weld because being an 01, it's only got the two. On later model cars, I believe there's up to 4. So in addition to the stitch weld, we've got an extra plug weld to hold that together. That's the wheel arch done. That's a pretty big thing if you ever reinforce in an E46. You have to do that as that's just as common as the subframe mounts cracking. Moving on, we're going to tackle the rear trailing arm mounts, and I'm also going to do a little bit of stitch welding back here. So I'm going to throw the gear back on and keep moving on. Alright, well that's all the stitch welding done. We've done wheel arches, carrier panel to floor in the front and the back, and we've just wrapped up here in the boot. As you can see, we've stitch welded the chassis rail to the boot floor. This portion here between this edge and that edge actually is the rear axle carrier panel, which is what the rear subframe mounts to. So we've just strengthened the joints with all these stitch welds, and we've actually continued this under the back seat here as well, all the way down to the base, as this section of sheet metal here actually is prone to separating from the spot weld. So that's it for all the welding other than now reinforcing. So now the entire chassis is stitch welded. I'm comfortable putting the plates on, as once you weld the plates on, if there's any residual stress, it could cause the chassis to distort ever so slightly, but I'm fairly confident that won't happen at all now. So I'm going to throw the car up in the air again, get the plates on, and start welding them up. Before that, I'm just going to do some quick prep on the plates to make them as weldable as possible. So I'll see you on the workbench. Alright, so this is the reinforcement products we're going to be using on our E46 Drift Build. This is our underside reinforcement plates and the chassis rail plates. These are a product I actually designed myself and I sell. Before I weld them in though, there's a few things I want to do. I like to go around with a flap disc and take off the zinc coating about 10 millimeters from the edge I'll be welding. That way I'm not burning the zinc, it's not going into the air, and it also reduces the heat of the weld and the amount of splatter that comes from it. So I'm going to put in the bench vise, hit it with a flap disc, and then I'm going to fit them up and get started installing them. So let's get to it. One thing to keep in mind when installing the reinforcement plates is that you're going to have to do some folding. You can see here that the chassis has a curve to it while the plate itself is just flat. So we're going to have to go and work this in to match the contour with a ball peen hammer. One thing I've done when designing these plates to make it a bit easier to do is wherever a fold occurs, or at least a major fold, I've included small notches in the face. That symbolizes essentially where the fold center line will land. So the trick is to tack it just on the opposite side, and then that way when you bend it up, you won't get any bowing between the plate and the chassis. That applies to the rear plates as well as the front plate here. For example, you see a little notch up there. If you tack just up there and work this down, you get a nice crease here and it'll perfectly match the chassis. So I'm going to go ahead and tack the critical areas that will hold the plates in such a way. Once I do that, I'm then going to fill the little plug weld locations, or the various holes on the subframe plates. That way I am certain that the contacting faces are flat and level, rather than doing the perimeter first, as any heat distortion can cause the plate to expand and bow. So I personally do it in this order, and I believe I'm ready to get into it. So I'm going to gear up and get started. So let's do that. Alright, well that's the underside plates in. I'm just having a minute to admire my own welds. Some are pretty good, some I'm probably not going to show to the camera. No, I'm just kidding. They're actually all relatively good. There's a few areas where wherever some of this rubberized material was physically stuck and you just simply couldn't get to it, such as these tight edges. It was burning, blowing, bubbles, and also just liquefying, which makes welding a little bit harder, but all in all I'd give myself an A-, so pretty happy with the way it came out. But this is only half the job. We now got to lower the car down and start cutting into the boot. We're going to open up the rear axle carrier panel from above and link the chassis rail directly to it, so there's no chance of this floor ever separating from the rest of the car. So I'm going to drop it down, climb in the boot again, and pull out the grinder. Alright, so moving on to what we've got to do up on this end of things, we've got to open up the top of the rear subframe mounts. They are hidden under this piece here, so that's between where I was chiseling and the spare wheel well. The way to do that, I'm going to drill out the spot weld holding this section of the panel down here. I'm going to run a straight slice up to the top of it around this odd shape.
I'm then going to cut down the little chassis rail flange, cutting off these 2 factory welds, and then slice it there. And then that should all pull away as one nice piece. So start on this side, do the other, and then we'll see what we're in for under there. So I'm going to climb back out.
Well, that's the prep work for the chassis rail plates pretty much complete. As you saw, we cut a hole in the section of the spare wheel well, exposing the top of the rear axle carrier panel. One thing I just wanted to show you before we go any further is the top of the rear subframe mounts. So that there is our rear left mount, and this here is the frame rail. And now that I've actually cut away this non-structural sheet metal, you can see that this portion of the rear axle carrier panel simply does not touch the frame rail. In short, it actually doesn't contact the chassis in any way until it gets to the wheel arch. So using this as an illustration, it's about 200 odd mil long. Goes quite a way in before it gets to the wheel arch. So essentially all the stress is sent out to that point, hence why those spot welds let go. And as soon as they let go, it starts peeling away from the boot floor here, hence why we've stitch welded. The plates are designed to try reduce that. As you can see, there's a burn mark here that the trailing edge of the plate left, and it wraps all the way back around to there to essentially strengthen the 2 points it separates from. But for extra support, we're putting these plates in. Essentially, they drop right in, contact that portion of the rear axle carrier panel, so therefore it's directly linked to the chassis rail. And we simply just weld along this flat and vertical face as well as around the entire plate. Before that though, I'm going to put a little bit of a knife edge on that contacting face, so that way we get full penetration for the thickness of the plate and it's not built up on the shoulder. So I'll put her in the bench vise now and take a little bit off before welding it in. Alright, well, we wrapped up the welding last night. We decided to call it a day there because we were running out of light and it was getting hard to see. So it's a new day today and we're going to wrap up what we started. The next step is going to be putting the car in the air. We're going to grind down the excess weld material on those plates. Then going to hit them with some primer, seam seal the welds, and then give them a lick of paint, and that should be the end of this. So I'm going to put her up now and we'll just keep moving forward. All right, well, that's it for episode 3. This car is officially reinforced. As you saw, we just wrapped up the priming, seam sealing, and painting. In the next episode, we're going to be dealing with the rear subframe assembly. We're going to pull it apart, press out some bushings, and freshen things up a little bit. So, we'll see you next time. Wait for me to do the tongue thing?
Yeah.
I nearly pulled my neck.
There you go.
Oh, that hurt so bad.
That's your outro.